Welcome, everyone. Hello, my name is Dr. Liz Burton-Crow. I'm the Director of Education for the Carrillo Center for Nonviolence. Welcome back to Living One, a free monthly webinar series where presenters from around the world share their vision about psychology, life, and culture in the absence of animal exploitation. Through Living One, we attempt to answer the question, we know it's wrong, but what does right look like? This month, we welcome Debbie Elliot, a connector and writer linking the worlds of human and non-human rights, arts, and education, and the change makers of yesterday and today via film and film production. She is a former high school teacher and a lifelong dancer. In 1998, Deb and her husband, James Friedan, started teachwithmovies.org, or TWM. By 2002, tens of thousands of teachers and parents were logging on to teachwithmovies.org each month. In 2018, TWM released its first film made specifically for teachers, Cesar Chavez, Respect for All. The movie accompanies a learning guide which helps teachers develop lessons, showing that Mr. Chavez was not only a leader of farm workers, but he was also an ethical pioneer who applied the principle of respect to all beings. Deb is also on the board of directors of Our Planet Theirs Too, and a speaker at animal rights conferences around the world. So before I hand it over, today we're going to do things a little bit differently. Debbie has a presentation for us prepared, and they'll take about 15 minutes. And after that, we'll have our traditional interview conducted by Dr. Gay Bradshaw. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Debbie.
Hello, glad to be with you all. I'm going to just say a few things before I show you a clip from Cesar Chavez, Respect for All. I remember very clearly, I think it was during Barack Obama's first term, I was listening to the news and heard that Michelle Obama, who I'd heard speak before, had just been in LA to meet with some women's groups, and that she had enjoyed a lunch of slow roasted lamb. And I felt heartsick. I thought, if Michelle Obama isn't getting it, who is going to be able to make the connections between oppression here and oppression there? And a baby lamb. So at that point, I think the bug was planted in me that I wanted people, especially people who are very active in the human rights, the progressive communities in terms of, liberating people of color, women, indigenous people, any human group that was oppressed. I wanted them, hopefully, to come to believe that cause should be joined with the cause of creating a just and merciful world for our animal kin. And several years later, my husband and I went to a screening of Vegan Everyday Stories. And one of the people who was profiled in the film was Genesis Palacio Butler. And she was a fully fledged vegan activist at the age of 8 or 9 or 10. During the Q&A afterwards, the director, Glenn Scott Lacey, said, "Oh, and by the way, Genesis is the great-great-niece, the great-grandniece of Cesar Chavez." And Jim and I looked at each other and we said, this has to be a film. This is amazing. I had heard once, years before, that Chavez was a vegan, and it, sort of passed right through my consciousness. So we cornered Glenn, the director, after the screening and said, we need to make a movie about this. Jim said, let's do this. And I said, well, how about having Genesis learn about her great-granduncle through a trip to the Chavez National Monument, and she's talking with her family and with people who knew Cesar, because this man was just so remarkable. For him, although he was primarily throughout his life fighting for farm worker justice, there was no other group whose interests he, put behind his own groups. Everything that came to his attention, where there was oppression, where there was suffering, he was on it and he was backing it. So I'd like to just show you the last part of the film. The film itself is only 21 minutes. It is aimed towards teachers and classrooms, but just show you how cleverly Glenn slotted Cesar's interest in freeing and helping animals right in the middle of all the human initiatives. And so my hope was that there'd be a tacit assumption which would be conveyed to the viewers. Of course, animal rights, animal advocacy, of course it's part of a vision of inclusive justice. So now if I can get back to the film, let's see. Okay, thank you. Whoops, there's that. Go away, please. test. Am I going to? Okay. I have to get back to, no, where's Cesar Chavez? Come, Cesar Chavez. Am I going to?
You'll do your share screen at the bottom, that little green tab from within Zoom.
There we go. There we go. I'm sorry. There it is. I see it. Thank you. Got it.
Yep, pleasure.
But here he is. Okay. So we're starting. This is the end of a story of a woman who knew Cesar and whose husband worked with him. And this launches the animal part of it, and then we'll go through till the end of the film. Watch the film. Where did it go? Resume share. Let's see, resume share. He's up on my screen, ready to go. Sharing pause. Bring your shared window to the front. Uh-oh. I don't know how to bring
that you've started screen sharing, but we just see black. We don't see the screen.
Okay, so am I supposed to put you down? Sorry, I knew this would happen to me. I'm the untech. Here we go.
Click on it and then it'll come up.
Nope, that's something else. I did click on it. It worked so well this morning. Let's see. Sharing is paused. Resume share. Here he is. Yay. Okay, this should work. Okay. We don't want to go to the learning guide. We want to see the film from here to the end. Okay.
Cesar was a vegetarian. And when my husband was diagnosed with colon cancer, Cesar said, "You're going on a macrobiotic diet." And of course, I knew who else had to do it too, because I certainly couldn't eat meat in front of him if he can't eat it. And I gave him, and the nurse told us after Pete passed away that diet gave Pete 4 years of life. So that was very good.
We need in a special way to work twice as hard to make all people understand that animals are fellow creatures, that we must protect them and love them as we love ourselves. And that the basis for peace, the basis for peace is respecting all creatures. That's the basis for peace. And we cannot hope to have peace until we respect everyone, respect ourselves, and respect animals and all living things. And that's the basis, we think, the beginning of peace. We cannot defend and be kind to animals until we stop exploiting them in the name of science, exploiting animals in the name of sport, exploiting animals in the name of fashion, and yes, exploiting animals in the name of food.
There is no such thing as defeat in nonviolence. Cesar Chavez.
Our movement has been supporting lesbian and gay rights for over 20 years.
Cesar supported gay rights in the 70s. And this is not when it was a trendy matter. You know, this supporting gay rights in the 1970s, was not a particularly popular position to take. But he believed that how can you struggle for equality and opportunity for your own people when you deny legal rights to anyone else?
My grandmother went to my dad and said, "You can't go to school anymore. You need to help feed your brothers and sisters." And so he, like many other young farm workers, he dropped out of school and worked in the fields. But he always had this insatiable appetite for knowledge. And he read, and he was a voracious reader. If you want to know about a person, look at their library. You know, we're here in my father's library, and right behind us we have the complete writings of Mahatma Gandhi that talk about sacrifice and those things that we should aspire to be and to accomplish in life.
Cesar had an eclectic reading interest. For a guy with a 7th grade education, he was very well educated, but self-educated, and he read everything Gandhi wrote. A whole shelf of books is a complete works of Mahatma Gandhi in paperback. They're all dog-eared.
And then over here, he has the complete writings of Peter Drucker that talk about modern management techniques. And so on the surface, you would think that, well, what do they have to do in common? with each other. And the fact is, by themselves, they may not, but if you're a person that believes that the world should be a better place and that we should live to a higher standard, but you know that progress is only made doing the daily work, then it makes all the sense in the world. And that was my father.
He read about Gandhi's fasting, and he carefully followed Dr. King's career from the Montgomery boycott. So his commitment to nonviolence, as was the case with the major innovations that he pioneered, many of which were pretty foreign to the labor movement in that day, was based upon a philosophical commitment. Cesar believed that human life is a precious thing, a gift from God, and no one has a right to take it for any reason or any cause, no matter how just it might be. Remember the times. This is the 60s. The Vietnam War is raging. There's civil unrest. And he believed that the American people were yearning for an alternative to violence, and that if they saw the poorest of the poor appealing to them non-violently, that they would respond. He called the American people our court of last resort, and they were.
I'm going to see the room where Cesar Chavez fasted, and I have a lot of mixed emotions about it. I want to feel what it feels to sit in a room where he fasted, and that means a lot to me.
I'm going to take the little ones.
Okay.
As I was walking in, you could just feel an energy that was just pretty intense. It was really overwhelming. So I just decided to pick the little ones up and just get them out, just take them out with me.
Mom, I was wondering if I could be alone.
Yes, Friedan, sure. I'll be outside waiting for you, okay?
Genesis is in the same room that Cesar Chavez was in, fasting for 36 days. She asked me to leave, and at first I didn't know what I should do, but I decided to go ahead and give her some time to herself. I'm a little bit worried, but I have a feeling she'll be okay in there.
So those of us around him, some getting weaker each day. When the doctors began to get concerned about potential permanent damage, talking to him and saying, Dad, there's a lot of battles to be fought still, and you don't do anybody any good if you're not able to lead this movement. But understanding at the end of the day that it was such a personal thing that it was his decision to make alone. And so you have to come to terms with that. But in coming to terms with that, what you do is you begin to look at your own commitment and the things that you've done. And it becomes a very powerful thing, not just for family members, but for everybody. Because the idea is that if you have a man here that's willing to undergo that pain and sacrifice and suffering for something he believes in, what are we prepared to do?
I'm writing a speech, and Cesar Chavez taught me that if he can do it, I can make a change too, because you can be any age to use your voice. You can just think of what he went through and how he didn't let anyone stop him. So just always, whenever you think something is right, follow your heart and stick with what you think is right. So I can put some of that stuff in my speech. When I was 3 years old, my favorite food was chicken nuggets. I asked my mom, Mom, where do my chicken nuggets come from? She looked at me and she said, from the grocery store. What? We eat animals, Mom? I never want to eat meat ever again. Help the earth and all living beings on this planet by making conscious choices about the foods we eat, and let the healing begin. Thank you.
also find my, let's get this up, and escape, and stop. There we go. Now I just have to get back to Gay.
Thank you,
Hello?
Debbie. That was wonderful. So, Dr. Gay Bradshaw, would you like to begin the interview?
Thank you so much, Debbie. Really appreciate that. Is the movie available in its full on your website, or?
Yes, it has it. Yes, it's available in full with a learning guide for teachers and students. But anyone of any age can watch it and I think be inspired by Genesis and by him. It's free. It's all free.
That's fantastic. And tell us a little bit about Genesis. How many years has that been since the film?
We finished most filming, I think, in November of 2016. So she was 10 at the time. So she's now
teenager.
She's a teenager and still very active all over the world, actually. She almost met the Pope. She had a new Disney Marvel hero character named after her. I don't really know what that means, but yeah, she's all over the place working hard for animals. Mm-hmm. And now she's very interested, I think, in the same kind of way that Cesar went in through the portal of farm workers' rights, and then he just kept expanding, so there was no other. Mm-hmm. She is now getting very concerned about the plight of homeless people. Mm-hmm. So it's that same impulse. Here is where I'm entering, and this is now what I see as my vision expands, all one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I'll just make a personal comment. I grew up, in the I don't know, I won't say the shadow, the glow of Cesar Chavez. Mm-hmm. And, I'm imprinted forever on the lettuce thing. And yet and maybe I'm wrong, is he not well known? I mean, to me, he's well known, but when I have encountered people, his name does not come up or it's unfamiliar. Why is that?
I'm wondering if it's, unlike Dr. King, who had a whole country on his plate, in terms of what he had to attempt to transform. The farm workers were somewhat more localized. I think they weren't really localized, but it became more of a regional issue. And if you look at where his birthday is celebrated, it's mostly the southwestern states. Mm-hmm. A lot of schools don't even teach him in high school, although I've seen him in textbooks. And another reason we wanted to do this film, because at first we were calling it the stealth vegan film, because vegans in there, animals are in there with everybody else, is he really needs to be reassessed. He was he was much more than what he is known for, even though he's not widely known. We were trying to get Dolores Huerta to be in the film as well. She was his full partner. They had disagreements, but at the time that we were doing our filming, someone else was making a full-length film about Dolores, and she was like a unicorn. Somebody from the crew would see her at a hotel and, oh yes, I'd love to meet Genesis, and then she'd sort of disappear again. Mm-hmm. But his treatment of women was just extraordinary, I think, for that time. Lest we think that he was a saint, because all of our great moral leaders have feet of clay. He was a pretty vicious political infighter. He could be, but he was just out in front with everything. And people have talked to me. In fact, there was an interview done by a guy I think it was on CNN, with Dolores, and I think maybe Mark Grossman, his press secretary, was there, and they were saying, well, what about his stance on immigration? Wasn't he anti-immigrant? Not at all. He was pro-labor, pro-union. He did not want scabs brought across the border, to undercut the wages of people who were here and to be exceptionally maltreated once they were here. And he and Dolores confirmed this, worked very hard to get a lot of the farm workers on the path to residency and citizenship. And then in this interview, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was really funny. Dolores injected a note of levity. She said, oh, back in the day, we were all calling each other wetback. It wasn't considered pejorative. Cesar and I would call each other wetbacks. And she injected some more about their personal interaction, and it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm just looking at from my mole's eye view. He was a huge figure. I grew up in California, and of course, the migrant workers were all over. I mean, it was like in Oregon and Washington and all over, and they were really just part of the woodwork, very unnoticed and abused. And his work and the UFW was just really seminal in providing some kind of internal architecture of very basic rights.
Exactly. When I'd finished my second year of college, I had applied to come out and volunteer. And as it turned out, in order to keep going to school, I had to earn money. So I went to New York and got another job. But he has always been in the back of my mind. And when I heard probably 20 years ago in passing that he was a vegan, I just remember at that point going, oh, isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. And then the more we look at him, the more we see that this is something we have in the learning guide for the kids, your moral universe, and you get to diagram it. Later, I found out that Peter had written a book called The Expanding Circle that I hadn't read, but map your moral universe. Well, Cesar, maybe I'm in the center, then my family in terms of who I'm really concerned about. Maybe my co-religionists, my ethnic group, my social class, my pets. But Cesar, what we've tried to figure out is that he basically tried to collapse all of these so that there was no other. If you're thinking about a moral universe, he didn't really have another who was going to get in line behind anybody else when it came time to work for and confirm rights, rights of justice and compassion. Everybody was there.
Well, I think it's extraordinary that you did that, and I hope that it seeds even more, because I think that from what I've understood and read and listened to in his speeches and things, that I've been repeating in this last course is David Bohm. Imagine a world that he's a quantum physicist, right? And so he's coming from the perspective that there are no boundaries. There are no objects.
If you figure out how to really get that, please let me know. I love quantum. I love this stuff, but I can't get it.
Okay, well, read the Bear book, and the last chapter's on that.
Okay,
but this was his embodiment, you know what I mean, in terms of the way you're describing him, which I think is really phenomenal. And I guess I won't belabor it, but the contrast between, sort of the hagiography of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi. And I do feel that Cesar, Mr. Chavez was overlooked, has been sorely overlooked in this whole sort of landscape of spirituality and evolution of consciousness.
Yes, he was there. He was out there ahead. So we hope that there will be a reassessment of who he was, and the fact that a lot of Joaquin Phoenix in his Oscar speech basically, sort of paraphrased him, where others try to separate us into this group that's suppressed, and so this group is working for their rights, and this, he said, I see commonality. And then he started talking about the cow whose baby, and I thought, well, yes, that was Cesar.
Yeah.
Cesar was like your moral godfather or something. It's really one push towards justice and compassion.
I wonder about the intersection then of his work and him and continuing his legacy in the farming community. The reason I say that is because, again, this is somewhat anecdotal, but it is sort of reified in texts and things like that, where you hear farmers who are talking about how much they love their animals and have very deep love for animals, and yet end up doing what they do and killing and blah, blah, blah. And I feel like there's a sort of a vein there of connection in some fashion. I don't know if that's something that you've explored.
I guess only in the sense that I know we have people in our extended family who love animals and keep some as pets, farm animals as pets, and then kill others. And I don't know how I would approach something like that. I do know that Miyoko and Rowdy Girl, those people are trying to help other farm families who have been killing animals and raising dairy herds. to convert to veganism. I feel compassion for those people. I don't understand how they can continue to compartmentalize, but it's not my livelihood, how to break through the wall, how to say, no, you really can act your love. You don't have to just, split it off. And this is not necessary work anymore. Everyone in the developed world can eat very healthfully, and some people in the developing world could eat very healthfully if they could keep their own crops and not sell them out to feed livestock. There's a way for us. You don't have to do this anymore, and I don't know what the next step would be on that.
And say a little bit about your own arc in your life, what brought you to where you are.
Well, I remember a lot of it is books. But I remember reading The Once and Future King when I was very young about King Arthur, and about how enchanting the part was where Merlin turned, what was his nickname, Newt? No, Newt is like a frog. Turned him into an animal, and he got to be a fish, and he got to be an eagle, and that really stayed with me for a long time. But it wasn't until I was... it was 76 or 77. In 1 year, I read Watership Down, Animal Liberation, which was recommended to me by someone in an animal hospital. She said, it's actually about farm animals. And I said, like, what are those? What do you mean farm animals have a problem? Knowing nothing. But read Watership Down, which hit a sweet spot, I think, in terms of the way the voice of the animals in that novel. It just knocked me out. And Animal Liberation. And I remember being kind of like almost having to take to my bed because I was so overwhelmed emotionally by the thought that these animals had a sense of subjectivity. They, and they had a personality, and they were meant, and they suffered so egregiously. And then that same year, my mother and father had a friend who was an American matador who lived in Spain. So we went to Spain that year, and we wanted to meet him. We met him. He was in a parade. He was very nice. And so he said, oh, you have to go see a bullfight. We went to see a bullfight and were horrified, numbed, sickened. It's the worst thing personally that I've ever seen. Here was this animal that was just urinating in fear, looking confused. And these people were torturing him to death, and then he was killed. And I think that was a turning point. And then we kind of went back and forth with vegetarianism and pescatarianism. My husband said, no. When they served us a whole battered fish at a restaurant, he said, that was a shimmering, swimming beauty. I can't do this anymore. So we became finally vegetarians. And then my sister kept nagging at me to be a vegan. I remember being at the cheese section in the supermarket and looking down and going, I'm going to have to end my life as a vegan. But 6 months later, we didn't have to wait till the end of our lives. And then just joining, being very affected by National Animal Rights Day, when Elam, I think it was the first year had been in New York. Elam Orion adapted it from Animal Equality in Spain, brought it here, and seeing people holding dead animals on the beach in Santa Monica and being again emotionally overwhelmed by it, and deciding that we had to join these groups. We had to start to try to change things. And, that went along pretty smoothly until the Michelle Obama roast lamb thing. And I thought, what's these people who are working so hard to bring justice to human communities? Why can't they cross the bridge? Why can't they make the connection? And I think because when we feel that connection, whether I know there are issues, whether or not it's going to be with what are we going to do with our companion animals? Should we let them all revert and become free roaming again, which would probably take 100,000 years? What about the liminal animals? And this is Will Kymlicka, right? The citizenship theory of domesticated animals as co-citizens, animals like eagles in the city and raccoons being liminal animals living on our borders. And then the free roaming animals, the wild animals, he says, should be sovereign nations. And that there's respect and care and responsibility to all of those groups because we've brought them into our human community and they're under our power. So Will's book was kind of inspirational also for me.
Do you think those categorizations, though, are problematic?
I think they're a good starting point to try to figure out, once care and justice for animals become a norm in our culture, we have to figure out what are we going to do with and for all of them. Certainly the animals that we have not enslaved and domesticated are going to be able to live on their own if we give them enough room. If we give them half the earth, as Wilson says. And I know Carl Safina was talking about that as well. Room for them. They're sovereign. They should be in charge of their lives. The liminal animals, a way to see them as beings that have a right to live. And our domesticated animals, that's a big problem for me. Not so much the farm animals. I've read a number of things about what we might do to release them from their burden. Do we simply, I think Jonathan Balcom had talked about, would they be euthanized and then there'd be no more factory farms? That is very problematic. I don't know what we should do there. But with our animal companions, do we really have to be hardcore abolitionists and say we can't have any more animal companions? We have to let them revert to being wolves. I mean, I think about our cat, Mr. G, who has, people have told us Mr. G's had a very interesting life. He's been adopted by several people. He has a 5-block territory that he mostly stays in, but we're now his anchor. And he doesn't want to be inside. He's been inside when he's recovered from surgery. He comes in and out, and people have said, oh no, bring him, let him be an inside cat. He's going to get killed by coyotes. But we know the kind of life that he has chosen for himself, that he wants to live within, the bounds of domestication and being a companion animal. So in that sense, we've given him, it's up to you, Mr. G, how you want to live. I think, and Liz and I were talking about this briefly, that the connections, the moment of connection, the touch point that we have with an animal or another human has magic to it. How are we do we have to deny ourselves the magic of companionship and relationship with them, an intimate relationship with them to serve their best interests? I don't know. So that's where I am, but I think about it.
Well, a large part of it comes down to, the human role. In other words, it's less what, quote unquote, we decide rather than what we decide to change ourselves in order to accommodate,
Mm-hmm.
Are you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we have to get to a new norm in our society. I think we have to keep bringing forward all the scientific information about the fact that animals are autonomous. They are the subject of a life, as Tom Reagan would say. They definitely have wants and preferences and thoughts about how they want to live their lives. And we have to respect that and not take away their lives from them, and we have to give them bodily liberty, allow them bodily integrity, as Steve Wise would say. So humans definitely have to transform themselves, but we are still in a power position on this planet, and we've been using that power to kind of wreck the place. We're living way beyond our means. So I think we have to transform our sense about who we are on this planet, which is that we're part of an ecosystem, and we're not astride it. We're actually part of it, even though we've created a huge bubble that's human-centered. And respect and compassion for the animals and for fellow humans and for the environment. So we must transform ourselves and then figure out, to what extent are we going to be custodians and custodial and guardians? Where do we need to be? And where do we just let go? And so I think it's, yes, first we have to transform ourselves, and the norm has to be compassion and justice for all beings. And how do we best do that and relieve the most suffering? So I guess I have a whole bunch of different thoughts about that.
No, just before you came on, we were just closing a course that we were teaching on nonhuman methods, research methods, and the speaker there was talking about the power of art, and she was talking about Blackfish. And you certainly are in the thick of it in terms of the film industry and all. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that that is a very important and powerful medium for the kind of transformations that you're talking about?
Absolutely, absolutely, because we'll get it in books. But it's very interesting. I've been thinking about this for a while, which is why I'm interested in fictional films with animals sharing the spotlight with people as genuine heroes or co-protagonists. I think that the documentaries have been very powerful. Blackfish had an impact on people that I never would have projected and predicted. True, it's not like it was a film about a dairy cow who escapes, and I wonder if David Duchovny will ever have that made into a film. I think people are ready to see for cetacea to be freed. A lot of them are. And so Blackfish really hit people where they were living. Yes, we're ready to see this. We're ready to respect the fact that these are extraordinary animals who deserve everything that we deserve. Moving it on to farmed animals is going to be a different thing. But basically, I think when you've got all these great documentaries, in a sense, they seed the way, or they're like, not John the Baptist, but they're a wonderful introduction to what we should next do in fictional stories and in fictional films, where you have a story arc, where you have a hero and you have the hero's journey. And that if we have that 1-2 of documentaries and then fictional films, it's going to be very powerful.
Do you feel that, in your obviously now restricted COVID circle, but prior to that, say, or in what other media, do you feel that animal rights and animal issues are quote unquote mainstream?
I think they're getting there.
Is it would you call it a mainstream topic? Would you call veganism a mainstream topic?
Well, it's interesting. I think veganism is, for a variety of reasons, because we can, tick off the reasons. The psychological pain or numbing of slaughterhouse workers, personal health, hungry people around the world, environmental pollution and destruction, animal suffering. So right there, you've got at least 5 reasons to be vegan. We don't have people all around us who are trying to be vegan, not always for the animals, but hey, whatever. And people say that once your habits change, your convictions can change as well. Mm-hmm. So I think veganism has become mainstream. And I think animal rights is getting there. And I do hope that in my lifetime, I'm going to see the beginning of the end, because I think we're at the end of the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I think that all of these alternative, what are they calling it now? Curated meat and all this stuff. And George Monbiot says that it's going to be unicellular. We're going to be creating food in the lab that's healthy and clean and good. And that this will pass away. Factory farming will certainly pass away. And Corey and Elizabeth have a bill to outlaw it by 2050 or something like that, break up factory farms. So I think animal rights is becoming mainstream, and I think veganism is already there, and we should continue to push in that way.
Mm-hmm. So you're hearing different in just sort of your social, whatever,
right,
that is, you're hearing these conversations, the discourse is different than, say, 5 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. We had another relative who used to sort of I don't want to eat anything that's vegan. And now she's asking me for vegan recipes and, is there any good vegan cheese? And we see it happening mm-hmm. all around.
And you mentioned that you had some kind of a constellation of getting together, like with Antoine Gushel and everyone. Was that something that?
Oh, right. Yeah, that was great. My husband and Steve Wise went to law school together in Boston decades ago, and then later we ran into him again and found out that he was doing animal rights, and we were already starting. And then he introduced us, Katrina Sharman introduced us to Tom Kelch, who teaches an animal rights course, or he did in Bordeaux every summer, who was an animal rights lawyer. And Tom told us, we have a lot of friends in Switzerland, and Tom told us we should go meet Antoine, and we did. And he's written a book in German, of course, about his animal clients for when he was the animal lawyer for the canton of, not Bern, Zurich. And they had that ballot initiative where there would have been a lawyer appointed in every canton for animals that did not make it through. But he wrote a book about his experiences and was saying that he would like to have it translated into English. So we haven't heard from him for a while, but I'm really, really encouraged by, and in fact, we saw that in National Animal Rights Day this year, that it was, of course, Zoom, and there were people from all over the world. People from all over, I think Elam went from 1 to 3 cities, and this year there were 60 cities globally that were celebrating. And we went to Greece and picked up some vegan activists for lunch, some young kids, and we're in touch with them. And we met some people in Japan where our son lives, got in touch with them, and they were doing an outreach event in Shibuya, and we did that with them. So to me, this is incredibly morale boosting, that this is really a global movement.
Has there been much discussion in these global intersections about the relationship of the pandemic and the animal rights or animal movement?
We haven't seen anybody since, I mean, I've been in touch with them, but via email, but we haven't really had sustained contact about that. But I think people are reading Jonathan Safran Foer's editorials and other, and Jane Goodall saying this happened because people disrespect animals. So that's the other that's reason number 6 to be plant-based, as they like to say, is because of pandemics.
And then do you feel like that there's a generational, in other words, that there's these generational jumps? We were just listening to Genesis, who's obviously special, but do you feel like there's these generational jumps that you've been encountering in your work with schools and teaching?
Yes, a lot of the teachers, all the teachers have been enthused about the film because Genesis is such a great inspiration to, middle school and high school kids. Jim and I say that we're the oldest animal activists on the west side of Los Angeles. I don't know if that's true or not. There are a couple of oddballs like us, but in the younger generations they're there. Yeah. What's the last survey that was done that between the 20 to 35-year-olds or 18 to 35-year-olds, 20 or 25% were saying that they were vegan. So yeah, it's definitely, they're going to carry it to the finish line for sure.
Oh, I'll ask you one more question before Liz takes over and everyone else has questions. So looking back, do you feel that this work over the years, is there one or two, significant changes that you have experienced which have transformed your relationships positively or negatively, however you want to call it, with fellow humans?
We have friends in the movement who will not sit down to eat with people who are eating animal flesh and secretions.
That's the Liberation Pledge.
Yes, right. That's right. That's what it's called. I've actually taken pains, although I've felt that way. I figure out that I have to put the best face forward in terms of what will be most helpful in helping people to see this in a new light. I have made jokes to relieve the tension that animal eaters sometimes feel when you meet them, and you can tell they feel reproached when you tell them you're a vegan. They take it as a reproach or a challenge. And so I've even made jokes and said, but yes, it's the real deal. And okay, Jim and I went 2 weeks after we became vegan, both of us being very secular. He was raised in the Jewish tradition, and I was raised as a Lutheran, and both of us are pretty secular. And we had religious revelations after we became vegans, which is very curious. You think it might be the other way around, but with that same kind of sense of epiphany and being dumbstruck. And he wrote an essay on it and said, after about 2 weeks, because my parents had taught me the golden rule, but they never applied it to animals. After about 2 weeks, I felt incredibly light, and I felt like my consciousness was expanding throughout the universe. And I can no longer laugh at people who say they've had religious revelations, because I've had one. And he said, I think what was happening was that denial takes psychic energy. And I think the denial about what I'd been doing when I was eating these products of suffering was lifting off. And I felt a connection to everything, every living thing in the universe. And I wrote something similar. His was more dramatic, but I told Liz that I'd always had this very shy interest in parrots because they just fascinated me. But I didn't feel I had the right to get to know them in any way, or to feel that we could stand in a relational, context at all. And that after I became a vegan, I felt that I had earned the right to feel a closer connection to animals. And one thing that we both say we want is the thing that we want every human to be able to feel that. It might be in relationship to your, wonderful cat with his own view of his territory in life, or your dog, or it might be taking a step to free an elephant from a zoo, but you're going to feel better. And as Jim says, you're going to feel like you're the best human being you can be if you let go of this old narrative and let yourself go for the joy. And the joy is in helping, not dominating. The joy is in connection, not exploiting. So I guess you'd say that since we both had these dumbstruck religious revelations about the joy, that's been transformative. And we try to tell other people about that.
Wonderful.
Without them, backing away. Oh yes, I've had a religious revelation. I've had an epiphany.
That's fantastic. Wonderful. Well, now I'll hand it over to Liz to take in other questions. Thank you so much, Deb. It was great.
Thank you, Gay.
Yes, thank you so much, Gay and Debbie, for a wonderful interview. And I think that's such a great note to end on in terms of unencumbering our relationships, right? So that we can really meet in a way that's more authentic, just soul to soul. So thank you for that. So before we shift to the question and answer and end the recording, I just want to do a quick plug. So hopefully you guys can make it to our next Living One webinar, which will be on August 2nd, and we'll have Stephen Harnad joining us. And episode 1 of the podcast version of the series is ready, and so keep your ears peeled for that. It should be launching sometime in the next month or so. So exciting news, and without further ado, thank you so much, Debbie, and I'll end the recording now, and then we'll switch to Q&A.